I'm Pastor Fred, which is a moniker that I've been working on helping community get accustomed to over the last few years. They would rather me be Reverend Frederick Hanna, but I'm trying to relate to our congregation in a different way, and trying to help us embrace some changes. So Pastor Fred is cool, if that's what you want to call me. I want to start off by saying that the next time I'm out of the pulpit, I want to invite Lyle Dykstra to preach for me. Lyle has taken me to lunch, and we've spent time together just talking and dialoguing, and I know Lyle is extremely passionate about the things that he is passionate about, but I saw a tiger a few minutes ago that I had not seen before. And I think you would do well in front of community live. Jimmy mentioned seeing people, and he talked about African greetings, and I was reminded of 2 trips I made to South Africa, and one as a student and one as a professor, and I'm looking around for Bob Schmenke. He would certainly be familiar with this word over here. Okay, you're being blocked, I see you there. But I remember the word Sawubona from South Africa, which is a greeting, and I remember little children saying Sawubona to me, and I remember those smiling faces in settlements entrenched in the kind of poverty that you have likely never seen. And those little bright smiling faces and those shiny little eyes saying Sawubona. Sawubona, which literally means I see you, you are important to me, I value you.
Oh man.
A poor little child, Sawubona. And it was such a beautiful thing to learn what that greeting meant and to share that greeting wherever I went. In South Africa, where because of what I was studying, I spent time in the poorest of places. I was allowed to go into places that the university, Rutgers University, told me you can't go into those places. I said, well, I'm from a place that's pretty rough. I'm comfortable. I'll go in, and if anything happens to me, don't worry. We won't try to come after your insurance company. But I was allowed to go into very poor places where people were in need and desperate need. And interestingly enough, my first stint as a pastor prior to coming to community in West Philadelphia, I saw kind of poverty that you wouldn't believe, that you probably don't even think most of you exist right outside of your doors. I became familiar with the term abandonments.
Oh my God.
First African Presbyterian Church, which I don't even think is open anymore, became part of an effort of Philadelphia Presbytery to combine the remaining Black Presbyterian churches, African American Presbyterian churches in West Philadelphia together in an effort to save them, because they are all on life support at this point. I think they're more of a job for a chaplain than for a pastor, but they're still working. But that church on 42nd and Girard was surrounded by vacant lots and abandoned buildings. And people lived in abandoned buildings, and the resourcefulness of poor people is quite amazing. That you could live in an abandoned building and have electricity and water and cable TV.
What?
Yeah, you figure out how to run wires across streets and into places where nobody is supposed to be living. And you find out how to secure your valuables and your belongings, and you find out how to eat, going from place to place, from this soup kitchen to that soup kitchen, this feeding program, from this pantry to that pantry. And you can become quite fat even living in an abandonment in that situation if you are resourceful, which poor people tend to be. But hearing that word made me think, and this is off the cuff, if you will, but I sat here listening and thinking. about that word Salmona, and I see you, and I wonder, what do my Presbyterian brothers and sisters see when you see your African American counterparts in this denomination? Do you see the rich history of African American Presbyterians? I recently studied some information that was passed on to me from the Mid-Atlantic Synod, and I got to see some of the things that were happening 25 years or so ago in churches, particularly around Charlotte and in our Synod, and there was some great work done. Recently, Katie Cannon passed away, and a fund was started up, I believe, with scholarship in her name, and we have some very rich history as African American Presbyterians in this denomination. We had, right at Community Presbyterian Church, we had Reverend Moyer, who's very much a part, or is thought of as a part of the civil rights movement in the state of Delaware. And what you should know is that any black church during the civil rights movement was a part of the civil rights movement. The black church was known as the NAACP on its knees during that time. And so we were a part of that movement, and pastors did occupy a different place of authority and presence in our communities at that time. And I wonder, when my white brothers and sisters in particular look at us, is that what you see? Do you see that history and that tradition? Or do you see that most of the, I believe we're less than 5% of the denomination, most of those churches that make up that less than 5% today are without pastors because they cannot afford them.
Shoot, I'm Pastor Wild.
They either have no pastors or part-time pastors or some sort of a supply situation or a commissioned elder in those positions because they cannot afford them. I wonder if you see that most of our African American churches are in dire straits as it relates to our financial conditions. I wonder if you see that a lot of our churches are in trouble. When you look at Community, do you see Reverend Moyer? Do you remember that the flags around the state flew at half-staff when he died? Do you see the history of this man in particular who was called from Crozier Seminary to start only 75 years ago the first African American church in Castle Presbytery? That's not that long ago. My mother's not much older than that. I wonder if you see that history. I wonder if you see that that church that was planted in the historic Dunleavy community, which is an outgrowth of discrimination, redlining in the city of Wilmington. I wonder if you see that great history that came out of that community is only where it is because the good people of DuPont decided that they would donate out of their vast riches a swath of land at the bottom of a hill where everything runs down and runs off, and said, here, you can have your first community where you can buy a home since you're coming home from World War II. And got this Fair Housing Act thing, and we think it'd be nice if you have your own place. I wonder if you see what's happened to that community in the years since that community was planted. January 2nd, 2020, you can find an article, it was in Delaware Online, that talks about what's happening in that community now. It's a community of first churches, and first judges, and first teachers, and first lawyers, and first doctors. And recently I eulogized the First Lady Barber. Do you see that, or do you see a community that's run down, that's now a vestige of not only white flight, but black flight?
Oh my gosh.
And if you don't know the history, Julius Wilson, I believe, is the author of a book called The Disappearance of Work, and he talks about how the industrialization of America changed inner cities, and particularly places where people left cities not just because of racial integration, but they left to go where jobs were more plentiful. And then he talks about how those places that were left by one group were then occupied by another group who were fortunate enough to be more educated and get better jobs and then get out of those same places. And so what you're left with in those places today is the poorest of the poor. And so we have a lot more of that in Dunleavy today, the poorest of the poor. We have those houses, homes that were built and cherished and loved in that beloved community today. Many of them are run down. Many of them are in various stages of disrepair. People who could afford to leave left not only because they wanted more opportunity, but because they were also tired of the black soot on their cars every morning from the pollution in the area. They knew what the statistics were around cancer in the area. They were tired of the stench outside of their doors. So they left for those reasons as well. I wonder if we see all of that when we see community, when we drive by that little yellow church with the nice steeple and the beautiful sign that the good people who are still left at community raised $25,000 to buy in cash, and I'm bragging right now, last year. And we're still there. And we're still in that community, and we're still fighting for that community. And while we are largely a commuter church today and not that same church that grew up in and out of that community, we are still doing our best to engage with the people outside of our doors. And some of the issues that we talked about, not just as issues abroad, are not just issues abroad, but are issues right in our own communities. And Reverend Hawkins mentioned quite a few of them. We have issues around environmental justice. We have these issues related to history, systemic issues. The infant mortality rate hits us right where we live in our communities. We have issues of hunger. We're in a food desert. We don't have banks. We don't have supermarkets. We have a multi-million-dollar library, but that's another story. Beautiful library, but that's another story. You don't necessarily have clean water right in Newcastle.
God.
Where's I have a blue cup over there where my bag is. I bring that cup to church every day. I don't drink the water at community. This is right in our churches. Right here in our churches. This week alone, I had questions around health care from a member and the need for health care. I had questions around recidivism, a member whose son will soon be coming home after serving 15 years in prison. I had a question about homelessness, somebody who is doesn't have a place to live and wants to know if the church can pay for them to stay in a residential hotel for at least another week. Questions around joblessness. Pastor, can you help me find a job? Reverend Moyer used to be able to get you a job at the Five and Dime 50 years ago. Pastor Fred doesn't necessarily have that pull. Questions around hunger. Do you have any food? Can you give me something from the pantry? Questions from a 12-year-old boy about domestic violence. My mother's boyfriend is hitting her. Questions around mental health. Pastor, I'm depressed and I don't know what to do. All the while we're writing sermons and writing grants and trying to do the best that we can. Right in Newcastle, right at Community Presbyterian Church. I think one of the biggest challenges that we have today as pastors is that for many of us, and I'm somewhat prideful, if I can use pride in a Christian context, about the fact that in PCUSA we have educated and trained clergy, and I have a seminary degree, and after I went to seminary, I crossed the street from New Brunswick Theological Seminary to the Rutgers Graduate School of Education, enrolled in a doctoral program over there, studied social and philosophical foundations in education and critical race theory, and I taught classes over there. Before that, I had a 20-year career in big pharma, and then I arrived at the pastorate, and even though I took the urban ministries track, I am still so unequipped to deal with the things that I deal with on a daily basis. And I have learned more than any other time in my life in this call, this vocation and call, how to lean on God. Yeah. I think about a story of a young man who came to me, and I just realized, just this instant, who this Instagram friend I have is, who I couldn't figure out his face, but I know him from somewhere, and I know his name. He came to the door of the church one day, and he knocked on the door, and I didn't even really want to let him in, because even though I'm 6 feet tall and about 200 pounds, and I know a little bit of judo, and I've boxed and a whole lot of other things, I didn't really want to be in close quarters with this young man. He looked big and strong, and he looked like he was going through some things, and I really didn't know. But we had a conversation, and he told me about how he had been living and what he had been through in foster care and group homes and in and out of prison, and his mental state, and how desperate he was feeling in that moment. And I looked at him, and he said, "Pastor, can you help me?" And I looked at him and I said, "I wish I could. I really don't know what to do to help you. Like, all I can do right now is pray for you. It's all I can do." This is the context of ministry today.
Yeah.
And I'll leave you with this. Even with all of that, I'm so proud of Community Presbyterian Church today. We are working. We are really working. I said this to the congregation last Sunday. I said, I'm so proud of you guys. In the last 2 years in particular, we have written grants to Ignite. We thank Castle Presbytery for funding our dreams. We would not be able to be engaged in the work that we're doing if it wasn't for the good people in our presbytery who believe in our dreams enough to put your money where your mouth is. And so thank you, Ignite and Castle Presbytery. You've given us the ability to dream and to work and to do. We have been a part of and are part of the Unglued Church Project, who's challenged our people to have conversations that, while I'm having them from the pulpit, it didn't necessarily resonate in the same way, but we were able to come together and have conversations that have pushed us all to look within and without. I'm thankful to PCUSA and echo Amanda's statement from those that you engaged with, that I wouldn't want to be a part of any other denomination. I know that this is where I belong. I know that this denomination embodies what I believe in as a Christian and as a citizen of the United States of America. And so I'm glad I'm part of a denomination that pushes a Matthew 25 initiative. I'm proud that my congregation has embraced the Matthew 25 initiative to the point where our Presbyterian women came up 2 Sundays ago and said that we're going to start collecting toiletries because we want to give out toiletries to the people who come and eat at our church on Saturday, because we realize they have needs other than just food, who said we want to run a voter registration program and some other things. My daughter has heard the congregation, the conversations, and invited us to collect socks for homeless people who don't have socks. Our congregation has heard the conversation, and we've gone out to residential hotels and given out food and toys on Christmas Eve instead of having a candlelight service. Amen. The denomination has made the Vital Congregations Toolkit and Bible Study available to us, challenged the church to come out every Sunday an hour and a half before service and have a Sunday symposium where we challenged ourselves on these issues so that we could become more knowledgeable and so that we could be engaged in deeper dialogue about what's going on in the world around us. And so I'm very proud of our congregation and excited to say that although we may be an aging congregation and suffering with or dealing with many of the issues that a lot of our congregations are dealing with, both within and without the denomination. At Community Presbyterian Church, we are a church that is working. We are working to clothe, to feed, to meet the stranger, to do the work that Jesus Christ has called us to do. Thank you.